You're the co-founder of the Monkey Cage, which is a very interesting, publication on the Washington Post on where it's combined the researchers and the journalists on research and data and its influence to the politics. To what extent the big data, the data today, influence the politics?
To the extent that governments are making more and more data publicly available and transparent and available to be scraped off the internet by researchers. This is a tremendous opportunity for journalists. That this is a whole new subject of ways in which journalists, I think, can learn about things that the state is doing in ways that were never possible before. So one of the big questions people have been interested in the last few months in particular is the role of this kind of, how is social media impacting elections and how are big data impacting elections? And I think we want to think about this in a kind of few different ways. One of the big ideas of social media is that social media allows candidates to communicate directly with the public without being intermediated by journalists, without having to go through the mass media, without having to get someone to cover you, that you can tweet or post on your Facebook page. This new media technology of being able to tweet or put things on Facebook or on Vkontakte, where that bleeds over into the established media and its coverage. And I think this is where President Trump is a kind of mastermind of this new world, where he's able to direct the conversation on TV, on our news networks like CNN and Fox News, by tweeting. This is not something that's going to be enjoyed by most politicians, right? This is something that is probably limited to presidential candidates, and it may even be limited to particular types of presidential candidates. Part of why Trump's tweets attract so much attention is that they're sort of outside the bounds of normalcy. This is not what you expect from a politician. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, as other politicians try to help structure the media conversation by using social media in this way, whether other politicians will be as successful as he is if they are not willing to sort of embrace the way that he has chosen to sort of use this media in a kind of almost shocking way to say things that people wouldn't have expected from a presidential candidate. The incredible power of Facebook is that if you know from your own campaign research that white 40 to 50-year-old voters in Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio are particularly concerned about trade deals, you can go to Facebook and say, I want to run ads that reach white 40 to 50-year-old voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio, and I want them to talk, this is the ad, this is the very specific ad I want to run that will appear on the Facebook feeds. And when you combine that with the sort of huge big data sources that are out there that allow campaigns and marketers to learn about preferences of citizens, I think it allows for this kind of sneaky feeling that you're being targeted with exactly what's important to you.
What we always see is this idea that the politicians more and more targets not really trying to get the people with whom they disagree or with people who disagree with them, but rather motivating those who are anyway would agree with them.
Do you run your campaign so that you try to turn out the base, you try to get voters who are your supporters but make sure they go and vote? Or do you try to convince the wavering voters that they should vote for you? And this has always been a challenge because there are different messages. The things that appeal to your base may not appeal to the voters in between, and the voters that you're trying to capture in the middle, especially if you're trying to capture supporters of the other parties, may not appeal to your base. What social media allows you to do, or anything that does these kind of micro-targeting of advertisements, is that whereas previously you had to, if you ran a television ad that everyone's got to see, you've got to balance between these two things. If I'm going to target ads on social media that I know are only going to my base, I can make them much more designed to the base. So to the extent that you would think, and this may or may not be the case, that what the base wants to see is stuff that is more polarizing, that is more negative about the party, it allows you to deliver those messages to your base without subsequently, or hopefully from the politician's point of view, without contaminating those wavering voters that you're trying to win over with a message that they might not like.
It's about the polarization of the society and this idea of us living in the bubbles.
Right.
And it's a very popular talk today that we are living in the bubbles, where there is a question, maybe we used to live in the bubbles, we just didn't know about that.
So on the one hand, there is a lot of evidence that social media allows you to find like-minded people. So if you're the most, extreme person in your village, right, and previously you had, views that were far off the mainstream, previously you might think, well, nobody shares my views. Social media allows you to find lots of other people who can share your views. And this is for good and for bad, right? Like you can think you might be, and this is the same sort of thing that has allowed, well, we don't have to put any normative in. If you have a view that's not shared by a lot of people in your community, previously you would not be able to find people who shared that view. Now social media allows you to find people. And you can build your own communities online where you share that information, and ultimately you can coordinate with people in those communities to be political actors in a way that you probably couldn't have. Now, we might think that in authoritarian regimes, maybe some of the people who have those minority views are people who were pro-democracy, who were previously excluded from the political conversation because the state didn't want those voices heard. And so that might be when people talked about social media as liberation technology, it allowed pro-democracy activists to find each other and coordinate. In other situations where where generally the people who are excluded from having voice like this are more extreme voices, on the other hand, when you look at communities like Facebook, like Twitter, there are so many people who are on Facebook in the United States at least, right? People join Facebook, they make their friends on Facebook, not just based on political reasons. They make it based on who their kids go to school with and their cousins and their family and their friends from when they were growing up. So actually what turns out is there's a lot of opportunities for information to permeate across different political ideologies. Now, that in turn can actually, if you were concerned about this sort of topic of fake news or misinformation, that can actually make things more likely to spread across grower things because it's not so, these internet bubbles are not so hermetically sealed from each other.
The hacking of the campaign and using these kind of tools and the skills to have the influence on the political process. As well, of course, it's a different story, but there was this recent the great article in The Guardian, about the companies like the Cambridge Analytics, where really this data is used by the political campaigners with a very clear message, and there are all things they can use, hacking, paid commercials, defamation campaign, trolls, bots. So there are a lot of other opportunities. So can we really speak about the dark side of that and what we really know?
This idea of trying to break into other campaigns' email accounts, it's illegal and it's new because this is sort of different, right? You're breaking into electronic communications. And we need to think about it. But we also have to be aware of this sort of history of this kind of political competition. So conceptually, the idea that you're trying to smear your opponent and you're not just having a civil discussion about the issues, but you're also trying to dig up dirt on your opponent. This has been going on for a long time. But there are some things that are very different about it in the electronic era.
What are also the new tools, if you speak about the trolls, bot, defamation campaign? And really, do we know about the particular, companies which are really doing that? Political PR was always there. So
right.
Had it changed the nature?
There is discussion among experts on this. When we think about communications related to politics online, right, there are different ways that actors who are upset about the conversations that are going on online or who want to seek to influence it can try to change that conversation, right? We've heard lots about the Great Firewall of China, where you have posts that are removed and censored. But another technique is to try to alter the climate online by altering the conversation. And that's where we get into kind of bots and trolls, where if you're an actor, you can not just say, oh, we're going to restrict people's access to internet content. You can say, no, we're going to hope people are coming to the internet, but when they come to the internet, we're going to make sure they see our messages. And I think what you're seeing right now is we're in a particular moment where there is a strong power where small voices can be amplified greatly online by the kind of media ecosystem in which they're embedded, where you can have small numbers of people sharing information that's harmful to one particular candidate or another in a political context or person, and that information can then be magnified by bots, magnified by trolls, but then you see the media then covers that story that's going on, and then the mainstream media picks up the first media that's covering it. Is that with these technological developments happening sort of so rapid fire, right? If you think about the distance from the printing press to radio to television, and now the changes that are going on almost a yearly and sometimes monthly basis in what kind of internet connections are available, what kind of, live streaming television wouldn't have been imagined, how many years ago, and now we have video and we have YouTube and we have all these things going on, is that it creates a real cat and mouse dynamic where one player makes a move, the other player catches up. So this idea that social media was liberation technology, that it would help pro-democracy activists around the world deal with less democratic regimes, for a period of time, that was probably right, because the authoritarian regimes that these activists were using social media to organize against were not aware of this as a threat. But once they become aware of it as a threat, they take steps. I think my personal take, is that the fake news that we saw in the US election in 2016 took a lot of people by surprise, right? It won't take a lot of people by surprise the next time it comes. It already didn't. I think you saw it took fewer people by surprise in the French elections when this happened, right? So you sometimes get with social media and with these changing interactions between technology and politics, these particular moments where one side or the other has an advantage. But now you've got all the platforms working on ways to eliminate fake news, putting up barriers that are out there. You have campaigns that are aware of these as potential problems and can strategize about how they might deal with them.